You can learn a surprising amount about someone without asking them a single personal question, not by listening to what they say about themselves, but by watching what they do when they have nothing to prove. Because people are usually very good at controlling their image. They know how to sound kind, they know how to appear confident. They know how to say the right things when they want to make a good impression. But there are moments when that control becomes weaker. A waiter makes a mistake, someone disagrees with them. They realize nobody important is watching. They lose an argument, someone more successful walks into the room, or they simply don't get what they want, and suddenly, you see something different. Not necessarily something bad, something real. That's because personality isn't revealed only through big dramatic moments. It's often hidden inside the smallest behaviors. The ones people don't even think are important. The way someone treats a person who can't benefit them. The way they respond when they're corrected. The way they talk about people who aren't present. The way they handle silence, the way they react when someone else succeeds, and perhaps most interestingly, the way they behave when they don't get their way. These moments can tell you far more than a polished introduction ever could, but there's an important distinction. A single behavior doesn't define an entire person. Everyone has bad days. Everyone gets defensive sometimes. Everyone can become impatient, insecure, jealous, or withdrawn. What reveals personality is not one isolated moment, it's the pattern. When the same behavior appears again and again, across different situations, you start seeing something deeper. So let's look at those patterns. The first one is incredibly simple. And yet it tells you more about someone than most people realize. Watch how they treat people who have nothing to offer them. Imagine you're sitting in a restaurant with someone you've just met. They're charming with you, they're attentive, they're asking questions, they're telling stories, everything feels easy. Then the server arrives, maybe the order is slightly wrong. Maybe the food takes longer than expected, and suddenly their personality changes, their voice becomes colder, their patience disappears. They speak to the server as if the person has somehow become less valuable. You might think, well, they're just frustrated, maybe, but watch what happens next. Do they recover? Do they realize they've become rude? Do they apologize? Or do they seem completely comfortable treating someone differently simply because that person has less power in the situation? That difference matters, because when people are trying to impress you, you're seeing their social presentation. When they interact with someone they don't need to impress, you're often seeing their underlying attitude toward people. A person who is genuinely respectful doesn't need a reason to be respectful. They don't become kind only when kindness is useful. They don't save their manners for people who can give them something. Their behavior tends to remain relatively consistent, and that's an important psychological clue. Character often becomes visible when there is no obvious reward for displaying it. Think about someone who is polite to their boss but dismissive toward coworkers. Someone who is charming around attractive people but impatient with everyone else. Someone who is incredibly friendly when they need a favor, then strangely distant when they don't. These differences reveal something, not necessarily that the person is evil, but they may reveal that their behavior is strongly influenced by status, usefulness, or personal advantage. And there's another side to this. Pay attention to how someone treats people who make mistakes, because mistakes create a small test of empathy. When another person drops something, gets confused, forgets something, or makes an awkward mistake, does this person immediately mock them? Do they become irritated? Do they use the mistake as an opportunity to feel superior? Or do they instinctively make the situation easier? That reaction can tell you a lot, because empathy isn't always visible when everything is going well. It's often visible when someone else becomes inconvenient, and that leads to the second behavior. Watch how someone reacts when they're corrected. This is one of the fastest ways to understand someone's relationship with their own ego. Imagine you're talking to someone who seems confident, they speak clearly, they have strong opinions. They're comfortable taking the lead. At first you might think they're extremely secure. Then you point out a small mistake they made, nothing insulting, nothing personal, just a simple correction. And suddenly, their energy changes, they interrupt you. They start explaining why they weren't actually wrong, they change the subject, they become sarcastic. Or they turn the correction back onto you. Yeah, but you do that too. Now you're no longer discussing the original mistake, you're managing their emotional reaction to being wrong. This is where confidence and insecurity can look almost identical from a distance. A genuinely confident person can usually tolerate the experience of being wrong. They may not enjoy it, but it doesn't threaten their identity. They can say, "Oh, you're right, I hadn't thought about that." That's a surprisingly powerful sentence. Because admitting a mistake requires enough internal security to separate your worth from your correctness. Insecure people sometimes experience disagreement as rejection. Being corrected doesn't feel like receiving information, it feels like losing status. And when that happens, the person isn't necessarily defending an idea anymore, they're defending their self-image. Of course, everyone gets defensive occasionally. The important thing is the pattern. What happens when they realize they were wrong? Can they laugh at themselves? Can they reconsider? Can they change their position, or do they need to win every conversation? There's a subtle difference between confidence and the appearance of confidence. Real confidence has room for uncertainty. It can say, I don't know, it can say, I was wrong. It can listen, and sometimes, the quietest person in the conversation is actually the most secure. Because they don't need to prove that they already know everything, which brings us to the third behavior. Pay attention to how someone talks about people who aren't there. This one is easy to miss because gossip often feels like connection. Someone tells you a secret, they reveal something embarrassing about another person, they explain why someone failed. They tell you what someone supposedly said behind your back, and for a moment, you may feel special, you might think they trust me. But there's another question worth asking. If they're this comfortable exposing someone else's private life to you, what happens when you're not in the room? That's the uncomfortable part. The way someone talks about absent people can reveal how they handle trust, loyalty, and social information. Not every conversation about another person is gossip. Sometimes we're simply discussing what happened. The difference is often in the intention. Are they trying to understand, or are they trying to entertain themselves at someone else's expense? Are they sharing information because it's relevant, or because humiliating someone makes them feel powerful? And notice what happens when they describe people who have disappointed them. Do they say they made a mistake, but I understand why? Or is every former friend described as crazy, every ex is toxic, every former coworker is incompetent? Every person who disagreed with them is jealous. When someone's entire history is filled with villains, you should become curious, not judgmental, curious. Because mature people usually recognize complexity, they can acknowledge that someone hurt them without turning that person into a monster. They can admit, I handled that badly too. That sentence requires self-awareness, and self-awareness is one of the clearest signs of emotional maturity. People who never see their own contribution to conflict may be protecting themselves from an uncomfortable truth. It's easier to say they were the problem than to ask, what did I bring into that relationship? Again, this doesn't mean you should believe every negative story about someone. It means you should listen for patterns, and there's an even more revealing behavior. Watch whether someone can speak positively about another person's success. This brings us to the fourth behavior. Notice how they react when someone else gets what they wanted. Imagine you've been working towards something for months, someone around you gets there first. Maybe they get the promotion. Maybe they become more successful. Maybe they find the relationship they wanted. Maybe they simply receive attention that you were hoping to receive. And suddenly, you have an opportunity to observe your own psychology. Do you feel happy for them? Do you feel nothing? Or does something inside you tighten? That reaction is human. Envy isn't proof that someone is a bad person. Almost everyone experiences comparison at some point. The important question is what they do with the feeling. A secure person can experience jealousy and still choose generosity. They can think, I wish that were me, but I'm genuinely happy for them. That is emotional strength. An insecure person may need to reduce the other person's achievement in order to feel better. They got lucky, they probably knew someone, it isn't really that impressive. Anyone could have done that, notice what's happening, instead of improving their own position. They are trying to psychologically lower someone else's position, and that distinction reveals something important about self-worth. When your sense of worth is stable, someone else's success doesn't automatically become evidence of your failure. You can admire someone without feeling diminished by them. You can celebrate someone without secretly turning it into a competition. And sometimes, the most revealing moment isn't how someone reacts to your success. It's how they react when your success becomes bigger than theirs. That's where comparison becomes difficult. A friend might celebrate you when you're struggling, but become distant when you're doing well. Someone might support your dreams until your dreams actually start working. That's a painful realization, but it can reveal something important. Some people are comfortable with your potential, they become uncomfortable with your progress. And there is a difference. The fifth behavior is quieter. Watch what someone does with silence. Silence can reveal a person's relationship with themselves. Some people become uncomfortable the moment conversation stops. They fill every gap, they reach for their phone. They start talking about anything, not necessarily because they're insecure, but sometimes because silence removes the distractions. When the conversation stops, there's nothing left to perform. You are simply sitting there, with yourself, and that can be uncomfortable. Other people are perfectly comfortable with silence. They don't feel the need to constantly entertain. They can sit beside someone without filling every second. They can think before answering. They don't panic when a conversation becomes quiet. That can sometimes reflect emotional regulation. But again, context matters. A quiet person isn't automatically mature. A talkative person isn't automatically insecure. The deeper clue is whether someone can tolerate moments they cannot control. Can they sit with uncertainty? Can they wait? Can they let another person think? Can they allow a conversation to breathe without immediately forcing an outcome? This becomes especially interesting in relationships. Someone sends a message, the other person doesn't respond immediately, and suddenly the mind starts creating stories. They're losing interest, they're angry, they're ignoring me, they must be talking to someone else. The silence itself is neutral, but the interpretation reveals something. Sometimes the strongest reaction isn't caused by what happened, but by what the person fears the silence means. That's why emotional maturity isn't about never feeling anxious. It's about being able to experience uncertainty without immediately turning it into certainty. You can think, I don't know why they haven't responded, and leave it there. That simple sentence contains a lot of psychological strength. I don't know. Not everything needs an immediate explanation, and this brings us to the sixth behavior. Watch how someone handles boundaries. This one reveals an enormous amount about personality because boundaries expose how a person relates to control. Imagine you tell someone, I can't do that today. You aren't angry, you aren't rejecting them, you simply have a limit. Now watch their reaction. A healthy person might be disappointed. But they can respect your answer. An unhealthy reaction may look different. They pressure you, they guilt-trip you, they become cold, they say you're selfish. They suddenly remind you of everything they've done for you. Why? Because your boundary has interrupted their expectation of control. And that doesn't always mean the person is intentionally manipulative. Sometimes people were never taught how to hear no without interpreting it as rejection, but regardless of the reason. Their reaction gives you information, and there's another side to this. Watch how they respond when you set a boundary with them, and how they respond when you set a boundary with someone else. Some people are extremely protective of their own boundaries, but they have no respect for anyone else's. They expect privacy, but demand access to yours. They don't want to be questioned. But constantly question other people. They want understanding, but offer none. That inconsistency can reveal entitlement. Healthy boundaries are usually mutual. They aren't walls designed to control other people. They're agreements about what you will and won't participate in. A mature person can say, I respect your boundary even if I don't love it. That's a powerful form of emotional independence. It means they don't need everyone to behave exactly the way they want. And that leads naturally to the seventh behavior. Watch how someone behaves when they don't get their way. This might be the most revealing one of all. Because everyone can look calm when everything is going according to plan. The real test begins when reality says no, you don't get the promotion, someone chooses someone else. A friend cancels. Your idea gets rejected. A stranger cuts in front of you. Someone doesn't agree with you. Life refuses to cooperate. What happens next? Some people become cruel. Some become passive-aggressive. Some withdraw affection. Some start blaming everyone around them. Some turn the situation into a personal attack. And some take a breath. They are disappointed, maybe frustrated, maybe hurt. But they adjust. That ability to adjust is incredibly important because emotional maturity isn't the absence of strong emotions. It's the ability to experience strong emotions without allowing them to control every behavior. A mature person can be angry without becoming abusive. They can be disappointed without punishing everyone. They can lose without becoming disrespectful. They can hear no without deciding that the other person is their enemy. Think about the difference. A fragile ego says, if I don't get what I want, someone must be wrong. A stronger sense of self says, I didn't get what I wanted. And now I need to decide what to do next. That shift is enormous. It moves a person from reaction to responsibility, and you can often see it in very ordinary situations. Watch someone playing a game, watch them lose, watch them drive in traffic, watch them deal with a delayed flight, watch them receive criticism. Watch them face an inconvenience that wasn't their fault. You don't need to manufacture a psychological test. Life creates these moments naturally. And sometimes the smallest inconvenience reveals more than the biggest success, because success gives people opportunities to display themselves. Frustration reveals how much control they actually have over themselves. And finally, there is the eighth behavior. Watch how someone changes when they no longer need anything from you. This is one of the most painful patterns to notice because it can completely change how you understand a relationship. Think about someone who is incredibly attentive when they need something. They message constantly, they ask about your life, they seem interested. They make time, then the problem gets solved, the favor is done, the opportunity passes, and suddenly, the relationship becomes strangely quiet. Maybe they don't disappear completely, they just become less interested, less available, less warm. That doesn't automatically mean they were using you. People get busy, relationships naturally change, but if the pattern is consistent, it tells you something. Some people are deeply interested in what you can provide. Others are interested in who you are. The difference becomes visible when there is nothing to gain, and this behavior connects to the very first one. Because personality often reveals itself when the reward disappears. Who are you when nobody is watching? Who are you when nobody is impressed? Who are you when the person in front of you can't help your career? Who are you when someone else succeeds? Who are you when you are corrected? Who are you when you hear no? And who are you when you don't need anything from anyone? These moments strip away performance, but there's something important to remember. The purpose of understanding these behaviors isn't to become suspicious of everyone. It's not about turning ordinary interactions into psychological investigations. And it certainly isn't about deciding that one awkward reaction reveals someone's true personality. Human beings are more complicated than that. Someone can be impatient one day and incredibly kind the next. Someone can become defensive because they are tired. Someone can struggle with jealousy while genuinely caring about you. Someone can be quiet because they're thoughtful or because they're nervous. Context matters, patterns matter, and perhaps most importantly, change matters. One of the most revealing things you can learn about a person is whether they are capable of recognizing their own behavior. Imagine someone who realizes I was rude earlier, and instead of defending themselves, they apologize. That's significant, not because they never make mistakes, but because they can see themselves clearly enough to correct one. A person with strong character isn't necessarily someone who never behaves badly. It's someone who can notice when they do. Take responsibility and try to do better. That's a much more realistic definition of maturity. And maybe this is the deeper lesson behind all 8 behaviors. You don't really discover someone's personality by watching how they behave when they're performing. You discover it by watching what happens when performance becomes unnecessary. When there is no audience, no reward, no advantage, no reason to pretend, that's when small behaviors become meaningful. A person who respects others when there is nothing to gain is showing you something. A person who can admit they're wrong is showing you something. A person who can celebrate another person's success without feeling threatened is showing you something. A person who can respect a boundary, handle disappointment, tolerate uncertainty, and remain consistent when they no longer need anything from you is showing you something. And here's the part that can be uncomfortable. These behaviors don't only reveal other people. They reveal us because if you're honest, you've probably seen yourself in some of these moments. Maybe you've become defensive when corrected. Maybe someone else's success made you feel insecure. Maybe you've filled silence because you didn't want to sit with your own thoughts. Maybe you've reacted badly to rejection. Maybe you've expected people to understand your boundaries while struggling to respect theirs. That doesn't make you a bad person, it makes you human. The real question isn't, do I ever behave like this? The better question is, what happens when I notice myself doing it? Because awareness creates a choice. You can pause, you can reconsider. You can apologize, you can change, and that might be the clearest sign of all, not perfection, but self-awareness. There is something quietly powerful about a person who doesn't need to pretend they're perfect. They can say, I was wrong, I was jealous, I handled that badly, I don't know, I need some time, I understand why you feel that way. Those sentences don't make someone weak. They often reveal that the person is strong enough to face reality without protecting an artificial version of themselves. And perhaps that's what makes human personality so fascinating. The most important parts of us aren't always visible in our biggest moments. They're hidden in the tiny reactions, the half second before we answer, the tone we use with someone who can't help us. The expression on our face when someone else succeeds, the way we respond when someone says no, the way we behave after we realize we were wrong, those moments pass quickly, but they leave clues. So the next time you're trying to understand someone, listen to their words, of course, but also notice the moments between the words. Notice how they behave when they are frustrated. Notice how they treat people with less power. Notice how they handle another person's success. Notice whether they can accept correction. Notice whether they respect boundaries. Notice whether their kindness remains when there is nothing to gain. And notice whether they are capable of changing when they realize they've made a mistake. Because sometimes, the person doesn't tell you who they are, they simply show you, quietly, repeatedly, in ordinary moments you almost didn't notice. And if this made you look at human behavior a little differently, you'll probably enjoy the deeper conversations we explore here at Next Mindcore. Because the more carefully you understand people, the more carefully you begin to understand yourself, and maybe that's the most revealing behavior of all, the willingness to look inward honestly, without needing to like everything you see.